We'll be replaying our multimedia presentation for the benefits of the participants who have just arrived for the afternoon session. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin with the second panel session on Interfaith Perspectives on Malaysia Cultural Diversity. The moderator for this session is Dr. Pauline Leong, Senior Lecturer with the Department of Communication and Liberal Arts, School of Arts, Sunway University. The panelists for this session are Associate Professor Dr. Jaffary Awang from the Faculty of Islamic Studies, UKM, Reverend Dr. Clarence Devadass from the Catholic Research Centre of the Archdiocese of Kuala Lumpur, Mrs. Gowri Thangaya from the Malaysian Hindu Sangam, Dr. Jeslyn Sharnita Amarasekera from the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, Tunku Abdul Rahman University College. We invite the moderator and speakers to come on stage to start the forum.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. A very good afternoon to His Grace Archbishop Julian Liao, Reverend Dr. Clarence Devadass, Associate Professor Dr. Shantini Pillay, esteemed guests, students, and members of the public. I'm very happy to be given the opportunity to moderate this forum on a fascinating topic, Interfaith Perspectives on Malaysian Cultural Diversity. We are indeed pleased to have with us here today 4 distinguished speakers who will offer their perspectives on faith and cultural diversity in Malaysia. Firstly, I would like to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Jaffary Awang from UKM's Faculty of Islamic Studies. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Theology and Philosophy from UKM and a Master of Arts and PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Birmingham in the UK. His research interests include sociology of religion, Comparative Study of Religion, Interreligious Dialogue, and Tolerance. He has published many books, chapters, and journal articles on the subject of religious freedom and interreligious peace in multicultural contexts. Dr. Jaffary is currently working on a research project on guidelines by religious leaders for religious tolerance among Muslims and non-Muslims in Malaysia. Next, we have Reverend Dr. Clarence Devadass, Director of the Catholic Research Center, CRC, in Kuala Lumpur. He holds a doctorate in theology, specializing in Christian ethics, from the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome. Since 2012, Reverend Dr. Clarence has been the Executive Secretary of the Theological Commission of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conference. In 2013, Pope Francis appointed him as the consultor to the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. Recently, Reverend Dr. Clarence spent a year at the University of Cambridge in the UK as a visiting fellow. To share with us the Hindu's perspective on this topic, we have Mrs. Thangaya. She will be on our way, right? Who is currently Women's Leader of the National Malaysia Hindu Sangam. She has a Bachelor of Arts Honours in History and Geography from the University of Malaya and a Certificate in Religious Mediation from the International Islamic University, Malaysia. Mrs. Gowri is actively involved in social work pertaining to women empowerment and leadership, youth and development, as well as family well-being. Last but not least, we have Dr. Jeslyn Sharnita, Senior Lecturer with Tunku Abdul Rahman University College in Kuala Lumpur. Her main research interest is in transnational Asian literature in English, specifically transnational Sri Lankan literature in English. She is particularly interested in Buddhist perspectives within literary and cultural texts, especially with reference to individual identity and ethnic diversity. Thank you for all panelists for making time here to be with us today. Before we begin, I would like to explain the format of this forum, which will be different from this morning's. This will follow a form of a talk show where the moderator, which is myself, I will drive the conversation and prompt responses from the panelists. I will direct questions to them, and they will be given 5 minutes to share their thoughts on the questions posed. After 45 minutes, I will open up the discussion to questions and answers from the audience. Right, and after the 30 minutes of Q&A, I will then prompt the panelists for last statements and conclude the forum. Without further ado, I would like to pose questions to panelists. Right, what are your views on cultural diversity within the context of your own faith?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thanks to the organizer for inviting me to share very humble knowledge and very little experience regarding the interreligious dialogue. Then regarding the question that what is my views and what is the Muslim views regarding the diversity. Basically, Muslim point of view is based upon what the Quran mentions. And then I can conclude it. Quran has given guidance, guidelines, at least into 3 categories regarding the approach that should be taken by Muslim in terms of diversity, multicultural, multi-religions. The first is Muslim must appreciate other religion, other culture. This is based upon the Quran chapter 5, verses 48, mentioned clearly that to each among you have he prescribed a law and an open way. If God had so willed, he would have made you a single people, but his plan is to test you in what he hath given you. So strive as in a race in all virtues. The goal of you all is to God. It is he that will show you the truth or the matters in which ye dispute. So it is clearly shows that how the Muslim must be openness, must be ready to have a contact, to have a communicate with others. And another point is Muslims also have to give a respect to other religion as well. This is based upon another Quranic verses says, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of male and female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that you may despise each other. Verily, the most honor of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous of you. Is against tells us that we all come from God alone, regardless of race, nationality, and religious belief, and we are descended from one pair of parents, namely Adam and Eve. So against, and another verses which is supports that kind of respect is, and dispute ye not with the pupil of the book, except with means better than mere disputation, unless it be with those of them who inflict wrong and injury, but say, we believe in the revelation which has come down to us, and in that which came down to you. Our God and your God is one, and it is to him we bow. This is the words, the verses that urge the Muslims to be respected. I mean, they have to respect other religions. And finally, the third one is, Quran also urged the Muslims when they face the different religions, different cultural, they encourage to have interreligious dialogue, interreligious conversation. This clearly mentioned in another verses. Invite all to the way of their Lord with wisdom and beautiful preaching, and argue with them, non-believers, in ways that are best and most gracious. For the Lord knoweth best who have strayed from his path and who receive guidance. So this is among the basics principle for the Muslims when they are facing the different community, different religion. It shows to us that for Muslim, there must be openness. They have to respect and then to build up a communication, regardless of their different culture or different religion. In other words, there is no problem indeed to have a contact, to have a communication between Muslim and others. So that is my point of view regarding the first questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaffary. Very interesting. We've learned that 3 points, that appreciate and respect and of course interreligious dialogue. Perhaps the other panelists would like to contribute. Is the first question?
So thanks, Pauline, for the question. Yeah, the question is, about culture in the Christian faith. Now, I often ask myself, do Christians have a particular culture? And I think that the myth that maybe we need to break or to get out from, a lot of people think that Christianity is a Western religion, and it is not. It was born in the Middle East, very much a part of West Asia, and so it grew from a certain context, that the Christian faith was incarnated within a certain cultural milieu, So there is the cultural element in it. And since then, it has spread throughout the world, to many parts of the world, in fact, to all over the world. And to be able to see that the unity that Christians enjoy, it's not so much in the unity. I will always say that the unity is not in its uniformity, but we kind of share the unity in a certain aspect of diversity, which includes cultural diversity also. So the unity is not in the uniformity, but it's a unity in diversity. So because it kind of grew out of a certain context, there is also cultural assimilation, which some of you have already had a preview of the research that was done, was shown just before this session, which I will speak about it later. But the whole context is that because of the diversity, in that diversity, there is a certain amount of unity that Christians would like to enjoy and would like to promote also. And so I think for me, the key word here is that the Christian faith is very much incarnated. Incarnated simply means that it takes flesh, or it grew out of a certain environment, a certain condition or context, and it is from there that the faith begins to develop. But what many of us see in terms of the Christian faith here is because it is been brought by the missionaries who had come here first. And so because many of the missionaries who first landed in Malaysia came from the West, they brought along their own cultural experiences. And so there is this kind of myth that there an identity or a cultural identity for Christians. So for me, I think that the starting point, before we go into the other parts, the starting point is that it comes out of a certain context, and because it comes out of a certain context, there is a heritage, a cultural history to the Christian faith. And maybe I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Dr. Clarence. And perhaps Jeslyn would like to speak on the Buddhist perspective on this.
Hi, everyone. What I'm going to share is, I'll share what I grew up with. In terms of cultural diversity, I would say that my family would be a living example of that, because I come from mixed parentage. My mom is Punjabi and Sikh, whereas my dad is of Sinhalese, Sri Lankan ancestry, and he's Buddhist. So when it comes to looking at Buddhism, while I was growing up, I never really saw it as a religion, but rather as a way of life for me, because it was already embedded for me from the time I was a kid, that what I would see while growing up, despite the fact that my parents were of completely different religions, we were able to practice both. My mom would go to the Gurdwara, whereas my dad would go to the temple, and they would follow each other. So in terms of diversity, I grew up with diversity. And when it comes to looking at Buddhism on its own, I would say that in terms of speaking based on what I grew up with, visiting the temple and things like that, I never really saw Buddhism as, like, for instance, like what you said, that, when being Catholic is always associated with the idea of, a religion that comes from the West. For me, Buddhism, I never really saw it as, where does it come from? Because when I go to the temple during Vesak, I would see people, regardless whether they were Chinese, whether they were Indian, or anything else, and I would see them there. Because what I was raised to believe was that it doesn't matter what your culture is, because culture and religion are two different things. So if you believe in something, it doesn't matter what culture you come from, as long as you're practicing it or you have something to believe in. So in that sense, I've always thought of even religion on its own as something that is very diverse and therefore cannot really be categorized in a specific way. So yeah, if you were to ask me in terms of cultural diversity, I would say, being Malaysian on top of that, I would say I'm very diverse, and the religion doesn't really explain that, you have to be of a specific race or ethnicity or things like that, because one of the fundamental teachings in Buddhism is that we are all equal, and it's all about how you lead your life, and that's what that matters. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Jeslyn. And Mrs. Gowri?
Oh, this one is working? First of all, thank you, UKM, Dr. Shalini, for inviting. I'm Gowri, representing the Malaysia Hindu Sangam. Okay, the first question about cultural diversity. I would agree very much with my panel member here. We are in a country with so much of diversity. The current generation, especially, do not see religion as something that's, different for them. Okay, literally, what does cultural diversity means? People look at you. What language do you speak? Right? Where do you come from? What is your culture? Various things they ask you. But does it matter for us here in a country with multi-race, multi-religion? Yeah, it's a very, very big question. And we are talking about cultural diversity day in and day out. Why do we have to talk about this day in and day out? By right, by now, our Malaysians, fellow Malaysians, should have understood, should be able to celebrate the difference, not to say the difference, but the different religions, the different beliefs that is in our country. Okay, let me say something a little bit about Hinduism. Okay, basically Hinduism was born out of culture. One of the earliest civilizations in the world, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, around the Sindhu River, where they said Hindu. Actually, Hindu is not an Indian word, actually. It is Sindhu. But, during that time, about 5,000 years ago, the colonials couldn't pronounce si. So Hindu. Actual name, what we say for our way of life is Sanatana Dharma. Because, well, it's okay if you want to call it religion. It is a way of life because it is based on dharma and karma. Dharma is duty. From the moment you are born until you die, each and every Hindu has a duty to perform. As a child, as a teenager, as an adult, as a married person, as a father, as a mother, as a daughter, as a son, as a grandfather, as a community leader. So we believe in that. So that itself shows that culture is base for Hinduism, if you want to call it as religion. And many of you in this country will say, you pray to too many gods or deities. Well, actually, there's 330 million deities, different deities in Hinduism. And what do we believe? Actually, the eternal path, okay, towards moksha and reincarnation. There is also the idea of Trimurti, okay, the three main gods. Yeah, you call them Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But what does all these 330 deities show every Hindu? They associate themselves with the every deity, right? So even among Hindus themselves, there is diversity, right? So much. What else if we want to associate ourselves with other religions? But basically, as a way of life, for every Hindu, if you ask them, we accept every religion in the world as equal. We can easily go into any mosque. I mean, with the proper way how to enter mosque. We can easily go to any church. We can easily go to any Gurdwara or any Buddhist temple. So for a Hindu, you are associated with the God and the eternal path, dharma and karma towards moksha or reincarnation. So other than that, there is nothing that, that we see it is different than culture. So basically, culture is Hinduism, part of it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gowri. Wow, I didn't realize there was a lot of diversity. And how is culture, in the second question, how is culture embraced and incorporated within your faith community? In other words, the people within your faith. Anyone would like to?
Thank you. I simply want to share, based upon the Islamic perspective and from my own experience and what I'm seeing, how Islam has created my own identity. I identify that at least there are three main factors that created my own identity. The first is back to the Islamic teachings, in the sense that Islam have given a guideline to the all Muslim community, how to behave from the very early morning until at the end of the day. That is the very common principle. And then Islam also considers that whatever Muslims doing, it is considered part of the worshipping process. Not necessarily simply refer to ritual activities as can be considered as the ritual. So the first is about, as I mentioned, back to the Islamic teaching, where my parents give a priority on the Islamic teachings since at the home and until the daily life. Secondly, I'm seeing is about the environment. So environment also play an important role in creating my confidence, my understanding about Islam, where we are communicating not only with the Muslim community but also with other. I still remember when I was in Kampung, I also came from Kampung Boy at Penang. Even though the majority at Kampung is mainly a Malay population, but there is a Chinese family who opened the shop, and then we every day we go there, and I recall that I perceive how my parents communicating and with the non-Muslim and in Chinese at my kampong. And also not far from my kampong is there is a small city where there is a majority Pekan Penanti. So maybe some from Penang know that Pekan Penanti not far from Bukit Mertajam. There is so many Chinese communities. So that is part, I consider that is part of how I realize that there is other community, there is other non-Muslim community in my area. And then another part I think which is how the culture embrace or develop in my concern is about school. School also play an important role. Even though I was study at Sekolah Kebangsaan, so against mainly the Malay. But there is a teachers from Chinese or Indians. But one thing I still recall how I realized the importance to communicate with other, to appreciate the other is one books. The title is Tata Rakyat or Civic. I still remember one the story there, how they're telling about three groups, three boys, three different boys from the Malay, Chinese, and Indians. and how they communicate, how they play together, how they appreciate each other, how they celebrate. So it gives me some clue how important I have to appreciate other, how important other community as well in my own community. What should I do? So that is why I'm saying that education plays an important role in developing the sensitivity and our community concern regarding religion, culture, and other as well. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffary. Any other of the panelists?
In terms of cultural, how much of culture is being embraced within
your faith community.
within the faith, yeah. So when we look at Buddhism within Malaysia itself, there are two main branches as to how it started off. You've got Theravada Buddhism, which is derived from Hinduism and it evolved from Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar. And then you've got Mahayana Buddhism, which was basically brought in from China as well as Japan. So in terms of in Malaysia, how it started off was, I agree to what you said, it depends on the environment as well. Because with Malaysians, how it started off was, there were three waves of the spread of Buddhism in Malaysia. The first wave was through spice trade. So it started off with the people who came in to trade in Malacca. And then later on, the second wave was with the settlers that ended up staying here. So you see a lot of that in terms of the Peranakan influence and all of that. And then finally, you also have the third wave, which was through the British, when the British brought in Chinese as well as Indians and Sri Lankans into Malaysia. So this is where you started seeing more of different types of temples as well. I don't know if you noticed this, but there are many different kinds of Buddhist temples here, and every temple represents a different culture. You have got the Thai Buddhist temples, and the way they practice, the way the prayers are done are also in a very different way. You've got the Burmese ones. In fact, the first Buddhist temple was actually built by the Burmese settlers in the 1800s. And you have the Sri Lankan ones. Of course, if you're from KL, the most popular one is the Buddhist Mahavihara in Brickfields. And there you see a lot of the Sri Lankan culture being embedded into most of the practices there. So one of the things that I observe, because I go to the Brickfields temple, is that during Wesak, or when it's the Sinhala New Year, which is similar to Punjabi New Year, Good Friday, what's the other? All the others that are celebrated on April 13th, it's all the same time. So when during the celebration of the Sinhalese New Year, what they end up doing in the temple is that you have the prayers, you have the all-night chanting, and at the same time you've got a cultural night. So this is where you get all the performances, you get the traditional Sri Lankan performances, you get, nowadays we also get the Malaysian side of it. Before this, as a child when I was growing up, for me, whenever I used to go to the temple for Wesak or for the Sinhala New Year, I would always see the Sri Lankan dance and Chinese dance, because that was pretty much what the population within that area was. But then later on, as now when I go back, I realize that diversity has started to, make a difference in terms of religion as well, because we started realizing that, okay, wait, there are other people that also come. So now there are traditional Indian dancing, there's also, you've got Malay performance as well. However, I must say that in terms of the indigenous side, as in Sabah, Sarawak, I've not been exposed to that. But other than that, you also see it in every different temple. And for the longest time when I was a kid, I never knew there was a difference. For me, it's like Buddha is the same. You know, any temple you go, you're going to get the same Buddha. That's how I thought it was. And then I realized that when you go to the Thai temple, the way the prayer, the language also makes a difference, because the chanting is done differently. When you go to the Buddhist temple in Brickfields, it's done in Pali. which is the traditional way. And they also have got prayers, the chanting that is also done in Mandarin. So it shows that in terms of culture, it has started to play its role in the sense that you're catering to different people because you're aware that it's not just one culture that is practicing this. So in order to cater to that, I think it's the same. You've got services done in English, in Malay, and so forth. So that's how I see it being embedded.
Thank you, Jeslyn. Now explains, I grew up in Penang, we had the Burmese Center. Yeah, now I figured that out. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Mrs. Gowri or Father Clarence?
Well, just to start off, maybe the question that comes to my mind is, if you ask a question, who is a Christian? Do we have a special DNA, or do we look in a particular way? It's like the question you ask when you go abroad, who is a Malaysian? I remember when studying abroad, the group of us who congregated, we all looked so different. And the Westerners would be utterly confused as to who a Malaysian or what kind of a Malaysian this is. You had one that looks like Indian, one that looks like Chinese. Then we had East Malaysians, Kadazan and Iban, and they look different. So, it's like, we are so diverse. So, even in Christianity, I'm limiting myself to Christianity in Malaysia. And let's not talk about other parts of the world. So ethnically, we are very diverse. One who looks Indian, one looks Chinese, one looks East Malaysian, one looks Filipino, and we all look different, but we all say that we are Christians. And because of this ethnic diversity, it simply says that we have come from, we carry a certain cultural DNA of our past that we have come across. I just traced myself. I can only go back maybe 4 generations, at least conclusively, to say that they were Christians. Before that, I really don't know. When I meet my ancestors, I probably ask them in the next world. But I really don't know. So I can go that far as that. So what it simply means is that the faith that was introduced, that came into my own family, it also came with certain cultural practices that were brought in, because those were handed on. As you were saying just now, it's not just that the faith comes and abolishes all the other cultural practices, which, quite a few, we keep, some are cultural practices, some have become superstitious practices, but we will not go into that. But the thing is, just because I think with Christianity, there's also a cultural diversity that brings with it so different expressions of the faith. So how do we incorporate? I think you've seen some of the pictures already. I think, generally, I think for Malaysians, we are dressed so diversely in the sense that, so one of the diversity, if you go into a church, you see people dress differently. This is the most common thing. The food that we eat, we are quite diverse what we choose. But most specifically, and I think already alluded to in our earlier speakers, the architecture. Very much the architecture that we have in Malaysia is very Western, Gothic. Keith, I'm sure, will be able to give us a better description of the churches that we have. Then also in art, very much of the art that we see, it comes from a particular period in history from Europe that we have inherited. But more than that, how we have incorporated would be some cultural elements that we incorporate into our worship. For example, one concrete example I could give is like the use of joss sticks. Traditionally Christians or Catholics are known to use candles. So the use of joss sticks, which is very, very Eastern. The use of incense is very much also part of it. Dance, decorations, you've seen lanterns, you've seen what we call the kutuvalaka, the lamp, the oil lamp that is used also. So the different celebrations also, cultural celebrations are also assimilated. It's simply because I think for the Christians, we're talking about a community that has migrated predominantly from South India into Malaysia and also South China, and they've brought their own cultural practices into the Christian faith. So things like Harvest Festival is very much celebrated. Pongal which is, we have moved away from being an agricultural society completely, but yeah, so we still celebrate because of that affinity to your identity. I don't know how much is connected to daily life, but those are the challenges. But it's a connection to your cultural heritage. Chinese New Year, you've seen giving out of oranges, and not forgetting the ang paos also. Yeah, everybody lines up for the ang pao. But Gowri celebration into our churches also. So it's very much a part of the lived faith. So that's why I started off by saying that the Christian faith is not so much a faith that has been imported. Because of the visuals that we have, we see churches that have similarities with churches in Europe, the art that we see. So it's not, we are in a transitional period, I would say. There are people who have tried to incorporate architecture, art in a Malaysian way into the expression of Christian faith. So I think predominantly you would see in our worship, there are elements that are used that are very much cultural, which goes beyond your dressing and the food that we eat. So those elements are somehow a connection with a past. With, I would think that even my generation, I mean, the generations after me would have very little association with those cultural practices. One of the things that I always remember is that when I was growing up as a young child, my mother will always say, you never sweep the house at night. I never understood why you never sweep, cultural or superstitious. I don't know how it's come about, but it's like, so you grew up with that kind of an idea that there is a past that you carry with you in your faith. Though it may sound very trivial, but it's just some kind of an association with what. So I think for the Christians is that the incorporation is very much an expression of a lived faith, a dynamic faith, not a static faith of the past, but something that is connected with what you live and what you practice today.
Ms. Gowri?
Hello. Okay. Yeah, the same goes with Hindus as well. Basically, it is a religion, Hinduism, originated from India. It is a very diverse country. I do not know actually how many ethnic Indians are in India, but basically I think all of those ethnic Indians are in Malaysia as well, from north to south, all right? So can you imagine, although we have the basic teaching of Trimurti, the main two big sectors of Saivism and Vaishnavism, Vaishnavites and the Saivites. Saivites pray to Lord Shiva. The Vaishnavites pray to Lord Vishnu. Yeah, and within the Indians in Malaysia themselves, you have the different mini-ethnics. You have the majority Tamils who came from South India, and also Malayalis, also from Kerala. You can say it's from the south part as well. The Telugus from Andhra Pradesh. You have many more, the Siddhis, Gujaratis, you name it, everybody is here. So the culture that they have brought from India, it is emanated here now in our country, right? So when you say Indians, basically we are a community with so many celebrations. Almost every day there is something going on somewhere. And of course there are temples all over the place. You have big temples, small temples, house temples, all right? So let's forget about that. But how these temples came about? Okay, if I can go back to India during Raja Rajendra Chola period. Okay, there's one temple in South India called Thanjavur Periya Koil, all right? Was built by Rajendra Chola king as a community center for the people around the area. So it's the same concept that was brought to Malaysia as well when the migration happened. before the majority of Tamils came here as workers in the estates, the earlier trader group came in. For example, we have a community called the Chettiar community, the money lending community. They were rich people, yeah. So they came here, they built temples. Most of the Murugan temples, probably you have seen some Murugan temples or Subramanian temples, are mostly built by the Chettiar community. For them, the association with them and God is like transaction, exactly, for business. Every cent that they earn, they give back to God. And that is how, until today, that is how it's been practiced. So they built temples. Then came the estate workers. So they have to build temples for the estate workers. So if you travel around Malaysia, you can see, you can't see many more estates anymore, many more Indians in the estates, but you can see these temples still exist to this day. So the life has been around the temple, and the festivities and the traditions that was practiced since those days until now. It continues. Okay, I would take one example of the tradition of marriage, right? For the current generation, I do not know how you perceive Hindu marriage, but it's very much religious based. It is a religious tradition. Okay, it is every step, every steps taken, to perform the marriage by the Gurukul or the Swami, right, has a connotation to our religion. So that is how, until today, the communities of Hindu community in this country is still celebrating, as Dr. Clarence said, Pongal. It is a harvest festival, but still celebrated in some of the churches because they practice this back in India. We are not farmers anymore here, yeah, but the tradition, the culture is still being followed. And in every part of life, as I said before, from birth till death, every step, every tradition that is being practiced is based on culture. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's also a lived faith in that sense. Yeah. So the third question would be, how do you balance between cultural and religious identity, or is there's no need to balance? It's really part of you already.
Maybe I can start since I you want to put. I think it's intertwined. For us, you can't see the difference. Okay. As what I said earlier during the first question, the religion is a way of life. You are free to choose which way you want to perform your spirituality. Some of them prefer to use Jnana Margam. You say it is by knowledge. You learn. You understand the language, the philosophy. Some of them would prefer karma yoga, duty, service. You perform services to the community, whereby you feel through this duty you can attain, the maximum level of spirituality. Some of them follow bhakti yoga, devotion. Totally practicing as what has been written in all our scriptures. The hymns, the songs, the mantras. Some of them do sannyasa. They renounce everything and they go to their path. I would forget the material life. I just want to meditate and get my enlightenment. Right? So when it comes to Hinduism, as I said, there are so many ways you can attain your spirituality, and this is done, mostly by cultural way. So for us, I don't see that there's no need to balance anything.
Because it's part of, it's together.
Yes,
it's intertwined.
but you have to do it the right way.
Okay.
Because at the moment, in recent days and years here in Malaysia, as people are, being more diverse, different teachings by different people, even you have gurus who are not, recognized, tell so many different things to our people, and they get distracted, and they do not follow it the right way.
Okay.
So that is what we need to control.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Gowri. Clarence?
It takes a while for it to warm up in this cold aircon. Well, if you ask me to give a working framework between faith and culture, and I would use this framework for myself in trying to define this, faith would be that which you profess, some precepts that you subscribe to, and culture would be the way you express them or the way you live them out. So like you said, there is a confluence between the two that cannot be separated. Okay, let me give an example. Okay, for example, if you one example you notice that, like in our churches, if you are in the West, would be like if you were to say there's one part of our liturgy or our service where we say we exchange the sign of peace. In the West, very much people would extend their hand to shake. But in the East, it's very much a closed palm, something that's very, very Eastern, rather than shaking hands. Not that we don't want to shake hands or we are antisocial, but it's part of the culture of respect, and that is done also towards God in many ways. So there is this marriage between faith, what you profess, and how you live that. So there are many other examples. I don't want to go into all of them, but it's very hard to extract them into two separate concepts between your faith and with your culture. So that's why I think just for working definition, I would say that which you profess and that which how you express your faith has got a cultural nuance to it.
For me, I think it depends on the individual as well. For instance, I have friends who are Buddhists who are very much culturally inclined as well. So the way they practice the religion is also based on what their culture prescribes. For instance, if I'm not looking at within Malaysia, if I'm looking at my Thai friends who are Buddhists, the cultural aspects of their life in terms of rituals that are performed within the Thai community is also practiced within the religion as well. So in that sense, I think it varies according to individuals. But when I go to the Buddhist temple, I see different ways in which people practice the religion as well. For some people, I think you talked about the attire as well. I see people coming to the temple in saris. I see people coming in normal dresses, and then I see people coming in white clothing. So when I went to Sri Lanka, I realized, I observed this as well, that people who go to the temple, they would wear white, and then I was told that I have to wear white as well, which I found a little strange, because here some of them wear white, but you can wear whatever color you want. But in Sri Lanka, I was told that you should. And I don't know if it's something that was practiced throughout, or was it just particularly when I went to that specific temple. So I realized that there are certain things that they do in Sri Lanka, the way they practice Buddhism, that the rituals that they do, like you talked about the incense sticks and things like that. Growing up, we didn't use incense sticks at home. And then when I went to the temple, I realized that as I grew up, the older I got, then I realized there were more things that were being introduced. Because I always used, it was just the oil lamp, and then the candles were introduced, and then the joss sticks. So I feel that it also depends on the individuals. The more people, you know, of different cultures started going to temple, then different practices were introduced as well. So how much of it, I wouldn't say that, you know, it has to be there or that, you know, it cannot be erased. I think it changes over time as well. Because if I were to compare between the older generation, how my father and his parents, how they looked at religion and the practices that they followed, as opposed to how my siblings and I look at it, as well as, you know, other people from our generation, it's very different. Like for some people, they just see, oh, I'm Buddhist and that's it, you know. But so what is it about you that makes you Buddhist? And you're like, oh, because my family practices it, you know. So you've got all of that. And when it comes to culture, I think because culture is something that is interchanging, it's always constantly, you know, you look back at memory and then you decide to add new things as well. So it sort of comes into religion as well.
It's very dynamic, right? Yeah. Dr. Jaffary.
Yes. I just want to share a little bit from the Islam perspectives regarding the cultural. There is one principle that Islam allow all the followers to dress what kinds of dresses they want, but basically they have to, as long as it is not against the principle that Islam given to us. For example, in terms of dresses, so there is Islam clear indicates that for women, for example, they can wear the chonsa, whatever it is, it depends on them, but they have to make sure they cover all their bodies except the face and the hand. So that is the principle. What kinds of culture they want to sari, it doesn't matter for Muslim. That's why, I mean, there is a Muslim either from the Indian ethnics or from the Chinese ethnics or from different ethnics, but they can wear, they can maintain their culture, but they have to make sure that it is not against the principle which has been laid down by Islam regarding the dresses. The same thing also with the food, for example. They can eat whatever they want, but against there is a very, make sure it is halal, meaning that it is not, for example, they want to eat chicken, for example, or meat, make sure it is being slaughtered according to Islamic principle. So that is very basic principle for Muslim and for Islam in terms of cultural. So in short, that Islam welcome whatever cultural belongs to that ethnics, as long as it is maintained within the principle which is given by the Islamic teaching. So that is what I can say about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jaffary. I'm going to combine the last two questions in the interest of time. So in Malaysia, we have a multicultural society. So what do you think are the challenges of practicing faith in such a community? And how do you think our religious diversity fosters a sense of nationhood? So the first question is on, the challenges of faith in a multicultural society, and how does this help, to bring back to our title, how does it foster nationhood?
Sorry. Well, I think for me the starting point is, I think every religion, the basic principle of every religion is there is goodness in the world, there's goodness in people, and I think the starting point would be for us to look at our commonalities and build on the commonalities. For purpose of building a nation. So we heard this morning we are a state, but we are not a nation. if we are on that journey, and I think far too often in the past, in Malaysia at least, in the context of Malaysia, we have been, harping on our differences, and that doesn't really help the process of nation building. If we keep looking at our differences, yes, we have our differences, but it is not to a point where that we cannot have cohesion or cannot live together. But if we look at our commonalities, I'm sure we find a lot of commonalities. Simple thing like, the golden rule, which you all know, do unto others as you would like them to do to you, is found in every religion. And if you all follow that principle as a starting point, then I think we are working towards that unity that we aspire for, that we would like to work towards. So I think, I'm sure the other panelists would add, I think for me, if you ask me, there's one point is that, let's look at our commonalities and let's build on them. It's not the time to look at our differences. We have coexisted for so many years together, and I think it's possible if we look at our similarities and build on them, then we work towards a better Malaysia. And I think just to give an example of my own life, my father was a civil servant, and most of my growing up life was now what you used to call as government quarters. We grew up in housing provided by the government, and my best friend, my neighbor, was a Malay family, and I always tell the story. I said, whom I reconnected after so many years thanks to Facebook. She lives in Australia now, and we used to walk into each other's house. There were no differences. At 4 in the evening, we all went out to the padang to play. And we all drank from the same pipe, that water that was there in the padang. I don't know whether it's clean or not, but we survived. But, that's the kind of, we didn't see our differences. We just saw that we were kids from a same block. We lived together, we walked into each other's house, and we enjoyed each other's company. So I think that kind of commonality, if we can work towards in our different religions and even in our different cultures, then I think that's the path for us towards building a nation. I will let the other panelists add.
Those were the golden days, Doctor. Yeah. I do miss those younger days of mine as well, where we hardly saw any difference. My neighbor, Malay girl, will come to my house and eat. During Deepavali, 1 week before, my children's friends, Malays, Chinese, Buddhist, Sikh, all will come and say, Auntie, thosai and koli curry. Koli curry is chicken curry. And they used to enjoy it so much. And then they will go all around one whole day, visiting their friends. So that was the culture we were brought up. But I don't see that sort of things happening these days, right? So actually, religious differences can be used as a resource, as a good resource. Well, basically, our country, this good, superb country, I would say, is built out of our differences. The multicultural, multi-ethnicity, multi-religious. That's the basis of our nationhood, of our nation building. So if that is the basis, then we have to celebrate more. We have to start from home. That is what we need to teach our children. That we look out for each other. They are practicing that religion. This is what that religion teaches. You hear the azan. Oh, that is by the Islam people. You teach your children. And in schools as well. You need to teach our younger generation how to respect the different values, the differences, yeah, how to, what is the word I would say, understand. You have to understand the other culture and religion before you conclude anything about, you want to say anything, or you want to, make a perception out of the differences that we have. So that is the important thing now, I would say. You have to accept the fact that we are all in a multicultural group in this country. You cannot change that anymore. It is not going to be one religion, it's not going to be one race, it is all the races together. So let's live together. Teach our children, teach our younger generation, so that this is what they're going to teach their generations, that we need to live together in order to have a better country, a better nation in the future.
One of the problems, in terms of the challenges, I wouldn't say it's, I would say the problem that we have in Malaysia is the fact that we are so preoccupied with labels. You know, I find this funny. It's like what you said. When I was growing up, it didn't matter who I invited to the house for whichever celebration. My friends were forever confused. What do I celebrate? Because they were over, at my place for every occasion, whether it was Hari Raya, whether it was Chinese New Year, it's a holiday, my mom is cooking. So it doesn't matter. And so for the longest time, it was never, I never had to worry about all of this. And I think someone mentioned this earlier, when we were growing up, we never really noticed the difference. Yeah, we are different, we acknowledge that, but okay. And then let's move on. But sadly, I have to say this, the first time I realized that I was very different from everyone else was when I came to UKM to do my undergraduate studies. I mean, no, it was the best 3 years of my life, but but when I was first, in our first year, we were put into the hostel. And the first question I got asked was that, are you okay with sharing a room with a Hindu student? And I was like, what difference does it make? Because for me, it doesn't matter. Even if I'm put with a person who is, who doesn't practice any religion, I'm sharing the room. I'm not going to be doing anything with the person. So for me, I saw it that way. And when they asked me, they were like, oh, because, it says you're Buddhist, and do you want to be put with a Chinese person? That's what they asked me. And I was like, I don't understand what you want from me. I really didn't understand that. So I realized that, growing up, I had an issue with my moral studies as well, because, see, I'm so problematic. I had this problem with the word, when I studied moral, we had tolerancy. Why do I have to tolerate other people? Why can't I just understand them? And I always had an issue with that, because where religion is concerned, where culture is concerned, especially in Malaysia, we take pride in the fact that we are a multiracial country. We take pride in the fact that we've got a lot of cultures. I get very offended when I travel and people tell me, oh, are you from India? And then when I say I'm Malaysian, and then they look at me, yeah, but you're Indian. And I'm like, no, look here, I'm Malaysian. My ancestry might come from India, but at the end of the day, I'm Malaysian. I don't associate myself with India. Thank you. So, I always get very angry when people, and then when they see, they're like, okay, if you're Malaysian, then you're Muslim. And I'm like, no, there are other people there as well. So after a while, I just let people guess where I'm from. Half the time they're wrong. I've been told that I'm from Ecuador, so I'll take it. So yeah, what I realized is that we're so preoccupied with all of this, like, what are you? What religion do you practice? And that is our problem, because we don't accept the fact that every religion, the fundamentals of every religion teaches the same thing: be a good person, and treat others the way you want to be treated. So why do we need to label all of this? So I always find this very strange, and I absolutely hate the word tolerancy, because no, I'm not going to tolerate another person. I'm going to understand the person and accept the person for who they are. So I think if we want to move towards nation, you know, in terms of talking about being a Malaysian, it's not about, it's like what you said, it's not about one identity. We have to accept the fact that we're different, and it's a good thing because it separates us from a lot of other people. But it also comes down to, you know, we cannot walk on eggshells around other people's religions. You know, I think when we talk in terms of Islam, like, we're very careful with it. We don't want to offend people. And then we realize that in doing that, we're also holding ourselves back from moving forward. So I think if we can work towards that, then the whole idea of, you know, accepting multiculturalism would make more sense.
Time already. Right. Talking about the challenge and the problems, my point of view that yes, I realize that there is, if you can say either it's a problem or a challenge. I might use the challenge when we are talking to building the nation within the multi-racial society, multi-community. The first thing is, for me, we have to build up the mutual understanding. Of course, it is easy to say that to build up the mutual understanding, but how? The issue is how. What steps should be taken? So when I listen the other panelists is, perhaps we can classify it into, as mentioned by distinguished Professor Dr. Samsul Amri, in talking about identity, he classified it into two categories: everyday defined and authority defined. So what I'm listening from the panelists is, most of the identity is based upon the everyday defined or everyday activities. We going to other house, we celebrate together. So that is considered as everyday. And then we have to realize as well that there is a block. I mentioned a block in terms of institution. We have a school, we have a different mainstream of school. We have a national school, we have a Chinese school, we have an Indian school. I'm not saying that we have to abolish, not at all. But the issue is how we can build up the bridge between different schools nowadays, as suggested by our Minister of Education. Perhaps, probably we can think to have some sort of the same activities, either we can share the sport or whatever it is. I think that is one of the challenges that we have to realize, and then we have to come up with a proper steps to build up the mutual understanding. I know that within the education, there's what we call it remote, where there is the idea that we want to share maybe the same facilities, but the idea behind that is to build up, to make interaction between one ethnic to another ethnics. That is one thing. And then perhaps another thing also, maybe for non-Muslim, they will see that the Muslim in Malaysia, for example, is very eager to practice the Islamic teaching. And perhaps maybe the Psalms says that it is the reason why there is a gap as between Muslim and non-Muslim. I would say that of course, there exists that kinds of situation. But the fact is we have to accept as well that Muslim trying to practice their own religion. And then there is a need for me, for others, to understand. The question is, we have to understand. Even though maybe some of the practicing is not in line with our culture or our religion. And then if there is a gap, exists the gap in terms of communication, so maybe it belongs back to the individual, not belongs to the teaching of Islam. As I mentioned earlier, where Islam encouraged all the followers to have a dialogue, to have a contact, to have a communication with others, to respect others. So if there exists some sort of against that kinds of teaching, maybe it is isolated cases for me. Because I know that I have read one book which is written by Batumale, for example. This is talking from the academically speaking. So yeah, it gives about Islamic resurgence. So maybe you know about Islamic resurgence, Islamic revivalism, which is occurred within the 1970s and 70s up to now. Even up to now, there are still impacts of that. We cannot deny about it. That is also part of the issues that I think we need to understand together. And then trying to, maybe the word I can use is agree to disagree. Sometimes we have to use that kind of quote-unquote slogan, whatever it is. And then as our doctor mentioned, the cases in UKM, for example, I know that because I also was a student in the 1980s, 1987, the first year student. So I know that. In terms of, during that time, the Islamic resurgence achieved at the peak in that time. And then where the students, when they want to put together between, for example, female students, yeah, they have to realize it, because within the Islamic teaching, Muslim women and non-Muslim women, they have what we call it, not the limitation, but there is the ethics should be practiced. That is the teaching of Islam. It is not because of culture. They have to cover the whole body, except face and hands, even in front of the woman, non-Muslim woman. That is the teaching. We cannot against that teaching. That's why I said, maybe this is one example. There are so many things against. So the issue is, my point is that we have to encourage our communities, regardless of religion, trying to understand other religion as well, as part of the process, how to build up our good nation. That is my own conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffary. Thank you to all panelists for your input. I will now open to the floor for questions. Since there is limited time, I would just like to have 3 questions. Any questions? Please use the microphone and indicate, introduce yourself and indicate which speaker you wish to address the question to.
Hi, I'm Keith. In the 21st century, the West is becoming much more secular, non-religious by and large. The same is not true of Malaysia. I just want to ask the panel, I won't mention to anyone specifically, it's up to the panel to decide who to respond to. from the panelists' point of view, would they prefer to see a less religious Malaysia to achieve that nationhood thing? Or do they feel that being a religious society as we are now, is that a good thing for nationhood, or is that actually a bad thing for nationhood? Thank you.
Thank you. Second question.
Hi, my name is Ahmad. I just want to ask Dr. Jaffary Awang about the problem with we understanding the other religion and other ethnicity. But the problem is within the Islamic studies itself. Let's say many Muslim doesn't understand about the gis, what we call the spirit of Islam. Because after the closing of Ijtihad, the problem become there. It's become problem because other religion, let's say other ethnic, see Islam is like a closed Ijtihad. Let's say when you speak about the Muslim woman need to close aurat because in front of the other woman not Muslim, but there is other ijtihad say that it's okay. So I think this problem we need to clarify in our community itself, our Muslim itself. So after that we can put it open to discussion. So this is my question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay, last one.
Yeah, the question of religions contributing to identity and nation building in Malaysia, no? Often we define our identity by excluding others, no? I'm Indian, I'm not Chinese. I'm Muslim, I'm not Christian. And yet, like one of the panel, Dr. Clarence said, to build a nation, we have to focus on shared commonalities or shared values. You know? Because this morning the speaker spoke of memory, no? Memory, Professor Shamsul. And even memory is selective, no? We choose to remember some and forget some. Who tells us what to remember and what to forget, no? So how do we go about in this process? How can religions contribute to identity and nation building, not by excluding, but including? Now the problem comes in when we are minority groups, no? Minorities feel threatened and want to assert their identity, no? Or because of globalization and changes, we feel insecure, we want to, you know, and there's a whole studies that has been done on it. So how to go around this whole thing is a big question, yes. But rather ask big questions than just go back with cliche answers, no?
Okay, thank you. Last question.
My name is Veronica, I'm from Seremban. Last night I sat typing something in my computer and I said, I want to go back to the 60s that I knew, the Malaysia that I knew in the 60s. And it was very interesting that Prof spoke about some of those, you know, food that has brought us together. I think I just want to address this question. Is it possible to go back somewhere near the 60s, you know, in this 21st century? And how do we start? Where do we start? I know, yeah, like Charles says, something related to what Charles says, but I think that's very important for us.
Okay, thank you. So there are 4 questions. First question is, can we go, could we be less religious towards nationhood? Second question is directed to Dr. Jaffary, a different ijtihad. The third question is about excluding identity and shared commonalities, and which is linked to going back to the 60s. So anyone to address any of these questions?
I'm just going to address Keith's questions and let the others deal with the other questions. Maybe that's the easiest one. This is a question that I've been asking myself. I've been trying to write something on this. I think what Malaysians are sure is that we don't want a secular state, the French model. We don't want that. Neither do we want a theocratic state. You know, we don't want the past model here. So we are somewhere in between. And I think this is where we are struggling and we are searching. Some kind of a hybridity between a secular and theocratic state that maybe Malaysia has a mission, or if I may use that word, to offer to the world, to find a balance between the two. because we are quite certain that, you know, we don't want a totally secular state in the way it's defined in the West. And I think that's quite without religion, and because we are talking about interreligious, and I think interreligion is very much a part of the Malaysian DNA, that it's very much part of our lives. So we still want that, but yet we do not want a kind of a one model theocratic state that controls everything in a particular religious value or system. So there is this. I think we are still struggling there. In part of my readings and reflection is that a lot of the struggles that we are going through is that, you know, we talked about ICERT this morning, you know. So it's the clash between the secular thinking and a religious thinking, and that's what we are fighting about, because, you know, if we introduce ICERT, you know, we're taking on Western principles, no discrimination, nothing else. Then what about special privileges and, you know, all those things, all this. So we are at the crossroads. I do not know whether it'll be in my lifetime. Well, I said the same thing about changing government, whether I'll see it in my lifetime, and I saw it. So maybe there is hope. There is hope. I think that we will find a healthy balance between a kind of a theocratic and secular state. I don't have a clear answer as to. I'm still struggling with it. I'm still trying to find what kind of a model can Malaysia offer. What kind of a hybrid model that we can offer to the world, where we can coexist the two principles or political theories that we want to merge into a new kind of a Malaysia. And maybe May 9th was the reset button for us to rethink of what we want. We know what we don't want. It's very clear. Malaysians know what we don't want, but we are not sure what we want. We think we know what we want, and everybody wants different things. And that's the problem that we are facing. So I think trying to define what we want is the journey that we need to take.
Okay, I'll try to answer the third and fourth. I'll start with the fourth question. I don't want to go back to the 60s. I wasn't born yet. But in terms of talking about identity, I think I can give a cliche answer and say, yes, you know, we can all live together peacefully. But logically speaking, in theory, it sounds very ideal, but how much of it is in practice? So I think it comes down to the individual itself. How much of it do you want? Because, you know, just like what Prof said earlier, you've got the everyday practices in terms of what we understand for religion, and then you've got what authority prescribes. So in terms of everyday life, how much of it do we want? If we are practicing it every day, and the more people practice it every day, eventually it's going to reach the authority. So it comes back to the individual. Although we see ourselves as, you know, having this collective commonality, but we're still made up of little, you know, parts. So it's just like, for instance, if we look at Malaysia, the amount of public holidays that we have public holidays based on culture, based on religion. But it wasn't like this all the time. For many years, I think if I were to look at when it was my grandparents' time or my parents' time, they didn't have as many holidays as we do now. And this is because where religion is concerned or where culture is concerned, people were fighting for it. They fought for Wesak to be declared as a public holiday. They fought for Diwali to be declared as a public holiday. So if we're going to look at whether or not how much religion can play its role, I say it starts with the individual. How much of it you want to practice and how much of it you think will be passed on to the next person. And when there's more people, like what you said, May 9 was an example of that. We know what we don't want. So what do we want? And do we want it enough to make a change? So I think it still sounds a little cliche, but I think we're getting there eventually. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, what do I say? I think basically we have a beautiful constitution. What is it said? Islam as a national religion, but everyone else is free to profess their own religion without any problem. So I think if we stick to that, and the authorities, I think another reason why we feel there is still tension about our religion, the practice and culture, is there are so much of regulations, so much of regularity. You can't do this, you can't do that. We have to revisit that. Okay, everybody is saying May 9. So I hope the new leaders will seriously look into how this can be changed. Okay, for example, when it comes to Islam as the national religion, you have the Jabatan Agama Islam, JAKIM, right? So they come with all the fatwa and all the regulations and all the do's and don'ts and stuff like that. But what about the other religions? We don't have any regulatory body per se to say you don't have, you cannot do that, you cannot. So that is why all the other religions, we just practice what we are supposed to practice. So you can see there is a disparity there, right? So if you want to regulate, all religions have to come together. It is not Islam and all the other religions flock together. So we talk to each other. In this country, we have the Malaysian Consultative Council of Religions, right? Dr. Clarence, Bishop is here. So we talk about what is the best for how to practice religion in a diverse country like this. So the Islam as well have to come on board to discuss with us, okay, how we can coexist. Okay, what do you practice which is against our teachings or something like that. And then we share, okay, this is the limitation. But now there are so much of regulation even to the extent at schools. You know, I do understand there are certain things that non-Muslim children's you can do and the Muslims you cannot do, or the other way around. So it is so much of regulations that is being imposed on the different communities. So the new government, as we have all agreed that they are going to bring changes, right? So it is time. Okay, whether the Islam side you agree with interfaith discussions or what, but I think it is the time. You have to come on board with us to discuss. Yeah? Although Islam is the national religion, so it is high time. But you have to tell us, and as every panel said just now, the understanding. I think we still do not understand. And the current generation is not going to understand if we are not going to put things in perspective. Right?
Okay, regarding the issue of ijtihad and also the problem among the Muslim communities regarding the fatwa, my answer is, first of all, even to the Muslim, and I believe that to all other religious followers as well, there is a need for the religious follower, be specific in Muslim community, to increase their knowledge. The most important thing is about the knowledge about their own religion. They have to master it properly. Because I do realize that even in Muslim community also we face that kinds of problem. We have the quote in quote and I don't want to use it. But not the knowledge of religious is very, very late. So there is a need, first of all. And then second, regarding the ijtihad, of course, it is part of the process in dealing with the changing in our life. So Islam has put it that there is ijtihad. And then maybe you says that either ijtihad still applicable nowadays or not. Yes, it's still applicable. But there is a scholars who determine some criterion. It is not easy way for everybody to produce fatwa or to do ijtihad. They must be a master in knowledgeable in terms of Islam, in every single knowledge from the language and everything. And then if they have that kinds of criteria, they are qualified to practice ijtihad. And then maybe some says that there are so many fatwas, there are so many ijtihad. But again, in Islam, yes, we do agree that, for example, I give you for example, we have a 4 mazhab. We have 4 sectarian. We have Shafi'i, mainly belong to the Malaysian. We have Hanafi, mazhab Hanafi, Hanbali, and Maliki. There's a 4 famous sectarian in Islam. So it is based upon the ijtihad, which is made by the leaders of that sectarian. And then up to the Muslim community, either they want to follow the regulation, the fatwa which is made by the one sectarian or another. But before they want to follow, it is important for them to know exactly the regulation that they are intend to follow from which mazhab. That is a prerequisite for the Muslims in terms of speaking about the fatwa. And then little bit regarding the either do we need to develop our country based upon the religion or non-religion? I agree that we have to follow based upon religion. In the context of our Malaysian community, because all Malaysians belong to the religious followers. That is my own concern, my point of view. Okay, I think that's all my response to the question. I do hope that you will give some ideas, even though maybe you will not answer directly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffary. So if you have other burning questions that you did not manage to ask or you want to clarify, you could approach the speakers after the session. I will now hand over to our MC, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Pauline, Dr. Jaffary, Father Clarence, Mrs. Gowri, and Dr. Jeslyn for such an interesting discussion. Let us give them a round of applause. Now, I would like to call upon His Grace, Reverend Julian Lau, to present souvenirs to the panelists. First, I would like to invite Dr. Jaffary. Next, I would like to invite Father Clarence. Also, I would like to invite Mrs. Gowri. Last but not least, I would like to invite Dr. Jeslyn. Panelists, please remain on stage as we would like to have a brief photo session with the symposium committees. You, Grace, you are invited as well.